It was the pain that brought me back to consciousness. That, and the smell, stale antiseptic air, the kind that made your stomach turn a little. I wasn't sure where I was at first. Everything felt numb, like my body was still stuck in some kind of fog, just waiting for me to wake up. But that headache, that was real. My skull felt like someone had used it for target practice. Every breath hurt, and every time I tried to move, I felt sharp, searing pain that shot through my bones like a lightning bolt. The first thing I saw when my eyes flickered open was the flickering fluorescent lights above me. The second thing, Darius. He was sitting by my bed, his head resting in his hands. He looked like hell, dark circles under his eyes, a scruffy jaw, and a look on his face I'd never seen before. Darius had always been the guy who could hold it together, no matter how bad things got. But right now, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usual calm? Gone. "Ethan," he muttered when he saw me stir, his voice shaky like he'd been holding back tears. "Thank God you're awake. I thought I lost you." I could barely respond at first. My throat felt dry, like I'd been swallowing gravel. "What happened?" I rasped, trying to focus. Darius took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room before meeting mine. He looked like he was about to say something, but he hesitated. I could tell whatever he was about to tell me wasn't going to be good. "You were attacked." His voice dropped low, and the words hit me harder than I expected. "I barely got to you in time." Attacked? The word didn't make sense in my foggy brain. My mind scrambled for any memory that would fit with what Darius was saying, but it was like trying to piece together a broken puzzle. The last thing I clearly remembered was coming home late from work. Sophia had been distant, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe she'd had a bad day, maybe something was going on at her job. Whatever it was, I brushed it off. Who did this? I could barely get the words out. My chest tightened, and I tried to stay calm, but panic was creeping in. Darius shifted in his chair, his fingers gripping the empty coffee cup in his hand like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. He seemed to hesitate again, like the next words were too heavy to say. "Sophia," he said after a beat, and I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "She's been seeing someone. Someone dangerous. His name's Javier." Javier. The name hit me like a sucker punch. My heart dropped into my stomach, and the room suddenly felt too small. I tried to focus, to make sense of what he was saying, but the pain in my head was blurring everything. "You mean Sophia?" I couldn't wrap my mind around it. "She's with him." Darius's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening as he nodded. "Yeah. Javier's the one who left you for dead, Ethan. He's the one who did this to you." A chill ran through me. My wife, the woman I'd been with for years, the one I thought I knew, had been sleeping with this guy. And he didn't just cheat on me. No. He'd nearly killed me. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was physical. Sophia had let this man tear me apart, and I was left to die. I didn't know how to feel at that moment. My head felt like it was going to explode from all the thoughts racing through it. Anger? Yeah, it was there, but it was buried under the weight of disbelief. Was this really happening? Was this my life now? "How did you find out?" I whispered. "How did you know?" Darius took another deep breath and let it out slowly, like he was preparing for something painful. "You asked me to check her phone a while ago." I started digging, and I knew something wasn't right. I wasn't sure at first, but then, I saw the texts, the late-night calls, the way she was acting. I had to follow her. And that night, I found you, behind the club, bleeding out. She wasn't there. It was Javier who did this. The words cut through me like a knife. I'd suspected for a while that something wasn't right with Sophia. The way she'd been acting, the way she'd pull away from me, always making excuses, always distracted. But I never imagined it would lead to something like this. I never imagined that she'd be cheating with a man who was capable of this. Did she even care? The question slipped out before I could stop it. I wasn't even sure why I was asking. Maybe I just needed to know. Did she try to help me? Did she even care that I was lying there, bleeding? Darius's face twisted with disgust. "No, Ethan. She didn't care. She didn't even know at first, but when I checked her phone records, I saw it. She called Javier several times that night. Not once did she call you. Not once did she check to see if you were okay. The pain in my chest flared up again, sharper than before. It felt like my ribs were about to snap under the pressure. I had trusted her. I had loved her. And she had let me rot. All for this Javier guy. My fists clenched by my sides, but I couldn't do anything. Not yet. Not while I was still stuck in this hospital bed, weak and broken. But something in me snapped that moment. It wasn't just the physical pain anymore. It was the betrayal, the lies, the coldness of it all. She's at home, Darius said, his voice strained. I didn't confront her. I wanted you to wake up first. I didn't need to hear anything more. My mind was already racing, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't the same man who walked into that house just a few days ago. Not anymore. And Sophia? She had no idea what kind of hell she was about to wake up to. Tell me everything, I said, my voice hard, cold. I need to know exactly how it happened. No lies. Darius nodded, and then he started talking. I listened, each word sinking deeper into me, each revelation hitting harder than the last. The truth was worse than I could have imagined. But now, I had the answers. And soon, I'd have justice. The days after I woke up in that hospital bed felt like I was living in someone else's nightmare. Every time I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the guy staring back at me. My face was bruised, swollen in places I didn't even know you could get bruised. But it wasn't just the physical pain. The emotional stuff, the gut-wrenching betrayal, that's what really kept me up at night. Darius had done his part, gathering information, digging into the dirt. He'd been relentless, tracking Sophia's every move, piecing together the puzzle that I hadn't even known existed. Every conversation he'd had with me, every moment we'd spent together, felt like a lie now. The more he told me, the sicker I felt. But I needed to know everything. I had to. The truth was like this poison spreading through my veins, and I wasn't about to leave a single drop of it behind. I needed to understand how deep this thing went. How long had she been cheating on me? How had I not seen the signs? Darius had been following Sophia for weeks now, watching her meet with Javier in secret, tracking her movements. At first, it seemed innocent enough, just a couple of late nights, a few strange texts here and there. But soon, Darius uncovered what I never could have imagined. There were meetings, Ethan, Darius said one evening when I was finally able to sit up without feeling like I was going to pass out. At least 4 times I know for sure. I wasn't about to tell you until I was certain, but when I saw what happened, when I found you in that alley, his voice trailed off, and I could see how much this whole thing was eating at him too. I followed her that night. Saw her walk straight to Javier's club. And then, I saw you. There, in that alley. I just sat there, looking at him, barely able to process it. My mind kept flashing back to that night, coming home from work, exhausted, thinking maybe I could salvage the day by having dinner with Sophia. Maybe get some of that closeness we'd been missing. But now, all I could see was the image of me walking into my house, the quiet of the place, the tension in the air. And I'd missed it all. Every single sign. But I wasn't blind anymore. Darius's voice cut through my thoughts. She wasn't just sleeping with him, Ethan. He's not some random guy. Javier's tied to some bad people. Dangerous people. It's not just a fling. She's in way deeper than you think. That hit harder than I expected. My hands shook as I wiped my face. The idea that Sophia had been tangled up in this world, this dark, dangerous underworld with Javier, it made everything feel even worse. She wasn't just betraying me emotionally. She had taken a step into something she couldn't come back from. And I had no idea. How did this even start? I asked, barely able to keep the desperation out of my voice. Darius hesitated before answering. It wasn't just about the affair, Ethan. I found out she had financial ties with him too. She had been borrowing money, making payments through accounts that were tied to, well, let's just say shady business deals. You thought she was just being distant, right? Maybe it was just work stress? But that wasn't it. This was planned. I could barely take it all in. Everything I thought I knew about Sophia, the woman I'd shared my life with, was shattered. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was involved in something dangerous. She was lying to me about everything. The person I had trusted the most had been hiding a whole other life behind my back. How long has this been going on? I asked, my throat tight. Darius let out a long sigh, looking like he was weighing whether or not to answer. It's been months, Ethan. From the moment you started noticing things were off, that's when she was already in too deep. She didn't just fall into this. She made a choice. A cold rush of fury washed over me. Months. This wasn't some isolated mistake. This was a full-on betrayal. She had chosen him. Chosen to lie to me, to pull me into this mess without even thinking twice about the man who had been by her side for years. Did she ever love me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. I didn't even know why I asked. Maybe I was hoping for some kind of answer that could make sense of all this. But it didn't. It couldn't. There was no justification for what she'd done. Darius looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure how to answer. I don't know, man. I think at one point she did. But somewhere along the way, she lost herself. And when she met Javier, well, that was it. It hit me like a wave, the realization that my marriage was nothing more than a house of cards. All those years, the promises, the vows, the love. It wasn't real. It wasn't real for her. And that hurt more than the physical wounds I had on my body. She didn't call 911, I said suddenly, my voice low. When I was out there, bleeding, she didn't even care enough to call for help. Darius nodded grimly. No, she didn't. And that's what stings the most, right? You'd think someone who's supposed to love you would care, but she didn't. She didn't even bat an eye. I couldn't swallow it. Every word felt like salt in an open wound. Sophia hadn't just cheated on me. She had left me to die. And now, every time I thought about it, I saw that alley. The darkness. The cold. The emptiness. She had let me bleed out like I was nothing. And Javier had made sure I wouldn't survive. But I was still here. I was alive. And I wasn't going to let this slide. Not after everything she'd done. Not after everything she'd taken from me. Darius had given me the tools. He'd told me everything I needed to know. Now it was up to me to decide what came next. And I knew exactly what I had to do. I just didn't know how deep the hole was that I was about to crawl into. The days dragged on like that. I'd sit in my apartment, staring at the walls, the silence pressing down on me. Darius was good about checking in, making sure I wasn't completely losing it. But, honestly, it felt like I was already gone. The man I used to be, the one who believed in love, trust, and loyalty, he was dead. That guy had been buried under a pile of lies and deceit, and no amount of time was going to bring him back. I spent a lot of time just walking around. Not for exercise, not for fun. Just walking. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't think straight. The anger in me was a constant, low burn. Every time I thought about what Sophia had done, my hands would clench into fists, and my chest would tighten until I couldn't breathe. I could barely stand to think about her, but I couldn't stop myself from doing it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her eyes, her lies, her voice telling me everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I had questions, though. A lot of them. Questions about what she thought would happen. Questions about how far she was willing to go to destroy everything we'd built. And more than anything, I had one big question. Why hadn't she just told me? Why hadn't she been honest? Maybe we could have figured something out. Maybe we could have. I don't know, ended it before it spiraled this far. But no. She'd kept lying. She'd kept me in the dark. Kept pretending everything was fine. Darius had found out everything for me. He'd given me the who, the what, the when, the where. But now, the decision was mine. What the hell was I going to do about it? I couldn't just walk up to Sophia and have a calm conversation about this. There was no talking it out when the person you loved had put you in the hospital and let some lowlife try to finish the job. I wasn't that kind of man anymore. I didn't want to be that kind of man. But I couldn't just pretend like it didn't matter. One night, I sat down and started writing. I didn't know what else to do. It wasn't a letter. Not really. More like a list of everything I'd learned in the last few days. Everything I had to confront. Every ugly, painful thing that had been hidden in the shadows. I wrote out her betrayal. I wrote out the lies. The way she acted like nothing had changed, like everything was still normal between us, even while she was slipping away. And then I wrote her name. Sophia. I didn't even know what I was going to do with it yet, but I needed to get it out of my system. It felt like my life had been one long, slow burn, and now I was finally getting close to the end of it. But before I could make any decisions about how to handle this, I had to face the one truth that was hanging over me. If I let it go, if I let her off the hook, it would be a part of me. It would eat at me, and I'd never be able to forget what she'd done. I couldn't let it slide. Not with her. Not with Javier. I wasn't a vengeful man by nature, but that had changed. I was no longer the guy who'd get upset, have a fight, and then move on. This wasn't something that could be moved past. This was something that had broken me, and I wasn't going to sit back and let it keep breaking me. It was time to act. I called Darius that night. I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to wait around anymore. I wasn't going to sit back and stew in my anger. I wasn't going to let them both get away with it. Darius, I said when he picked up. My voice was steady, but the decision had already been made. Tell me where to find Javier. There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear him weighing his options, knowing what I was asking. He knew what I was about to do, but he didn't try to talk me out of it. He didn't try to stop me. Meet me at the club, Darius said finally. I'll set it up. I hung up without another word. The next evening, the rain had started coming down in sheets. The kind of rain that makes everything feel heavier. The streets were slick, the city lights blurring through the wet windows as I drove. Every streetlight I passed, every shadow I saw, only made my anger build. I wasn't sure how far I was willing to go yet, but the thought of seeing Javier, of looking him in the eye and making him understand what he had done, filled me with a kind of dark clarity. When I reached the club, Darius was already there, leaning against the side of the building, his face unreadable. He didn't need to say anything. He knew. This is it, I said, stepping out of the car. I could feel the weight of everything I'd been holding onto, everything I'd been bottling up for weeks, slowly building inside me. It was like I was carrying a fire in my chest. Darius nodded. Just don't do anything stupid, man. I ignored him. The time for being careful had passed. We walked inside, the bouncer barely glancing at us before letting us through. The music was loud, the lights flashing in harsh, pulsing rhythms. But all I could see was the man I was here for, Javier. He was standing near the bar, laughing with a few of his men, acting like nothing in the world could touch him. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, like a pressure that needed to be released. The moment I saw him, my mind went blank. All I could think about was the pain he'd caused, the pain he'd helped cause. I walked over to him. Javier, I said, my voice low, cold. His eyes flicked over to me, a smirk tugging at his lips, like he didn't have a care in the world. You must be Ethan, he said, his voice casual, like we were about to shake hands. I didn't give him the chance. Without saying another word, I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him back, hard, into the wall. The guys with him were too slow to react. I didn't care about them right now. It was him. Just him. You think you can just do whatever you want? I growled, my fists clenching as I slammed him against the wall again, the concrete rattling under the force. Javier's eyes widened, but he didn't make a sound. I was ready for him to beg, to try to talk his way out of this. But I wasn't here for apologies. You almost killed me, I said, my voice shaking with fury. And for what? For her? For a woman who doesn't even care about you. Javier's smirk faded, replaced with a hint of fear. That's when I knew I had him. And I wasn't stopping until he understood the price of what he'd done. It was just beginning. The heat of the moment burned through me, thick and suffocating. Javier's breath was fast and shallow, his eyes darting around like he was trying to figure out what the hell just happened. His body stiffened as I pushed him harder against the wall, the concrete pressing into his back. I wanted him to feel this. To really feel it. You think you're untouchable, don't you? I snarled, gripping him tighter. I could smell the cologne he wore, the sweat beneath it, and the sharp, metallic scent of his fear. It was a strange comfort to me, knowing that after everything he had done, I was the one who had him cornered now. Javier sputtered, trying to recover his composure. You don't want to do this, man. You don't know who I don't give a damn who you know. I interrupted, shaking him harder. You put me in the hospital. You almost killed me. And for what? Some cheap thrill with my wife? You think I'm gonna let you walk away from that? His face twisted, and for a moment, he tried to push me off, but I wasn't having any of it. I had been too weak, too passive for too long. Now, I was the one in control. You've got nothing to say to me, I hissed. My hand found his collar again, dragging him even closer. His breath hitched as I leaned in, speaking through gritted teeth. You left me to die. You and Sofia both. You think I'm gonna just forget that? Javier finally dropped the cool act. His cocky demeanor faltered, and I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. He was starting to realize that this wasn't some angry husband having a meltdown. No, this was something darker. This was retribution. Listen, man, he stammered, I didn't know. You didn't know? I cut him off. You didn't know what? That you were screwing around with my wife behind my back? That you left me bleeding in the street? That is what you didn't know. I stepped back for a moment, breathing heavily. My heart was thumping in my chest, and the adrenaline made my vision sharper. Every detail of the club, the grimy walls, the flashing lights, the stench of booze and sweat, it all blurred into the background. All I could focus on was him. Javier. And Sofia. She doesn't even care about you, I spat, my voice thick with disgust. You think you're some big shot, but you're just her tool, the guy she ran to when she got bored of her marriage. You're nothing more than that. She never cared about you the way she pretended, man. She just wanted an escape. Javier opened his mouth to argue, but he closed it again, maybe for fear of saying the wrong thing. He was smart enough to know that if he said the wrong words now, I'd finish what I started. But I could tell the gears were turning in his head. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of this kind of anger. You think you can just walk away? I said, tightening my grip on him again. You think just because you're tied to some shady business, you're invincible? Newsflash. Buddy. You're not. You're not untouchable, and you're not walking out of here without paying for what you did. The fear finally showed in his eyes. He was sweating now, his face pale under the dim lights. I could almost taste the desperation in his voice when he said, Please, Ethan, just calm down. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't know she was that serious about you. She was just looking for something you couldn't give her. I felt a sharp pain twist inside me at his words. As much as I wanted to keep it together, part of me wanted to lose my temper completely. But I couldn't. I needed him to understand this wasn't just a fight over a woman. This was about betrayal. This was about what I had lost. Not just the woman I loved, but the trust, the safety, the belief that people could actually mean what they said. So, that's it? I asked, my voice low and controlled. You couldn't give her something, so she ran off to you? And you're okay with that? With using her like that? He hesitated, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes that looked like guilt. But it was quickly replaced by that same cocky, defiant attitude. Look, I don't owe you an apology. She came to me. I just gave her what she wanted. Don't give me that, I snapped, my voice shaking with anger. You don't get to make yourself the victim here. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you knew what she was too. But you didn't care. You just wanted your piece of the pie. A cold silence hung in the air between us for a long moment. The kind of silence that cuts through you, makes you question everything. I could feel my fists tightening again, the urge to lash out there, but I held it back. I needed him to understand something, needed him to know that this wasn't just some angry confrontation. This was the price he would pay for his actions. This ends tonight, I finally said, my voice colder than I felt. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I could stop myself now. But the rage, the hurt, the betrayal. It was all leading to this moment. There was no turning back. Javier tried to break free again, but this time, I shoved him harder against the wall, his head smacking into the concrete. The impact rattled him, and I saw a flash of fear cross his face. That's when I knew. I had him. "Where is she?" I growled, tightening my grip once more. "Where is Sophia?" His eyes widened, the fear in them now undeniable. I don't know where she is right now, but I swear, man, it wasn't supposed to go this far. I didn't know she was married. Not until later. She told me things. Told me things about you. Things that made me think you didn't care. I felt my pulse spike, anger rushing through me again, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't just about Javier. It was about her too. "She's at home, isn't she?" I said, my voice dangerously low. Javier's eyes flickered with panic, but he didn't answer. I didn't need him to. I knew exactly where she'd be. I released him with one final shove, watching him stumble back. "Stay out of my way," I said quietly. "If I see you again, you won't be so lucky." And with that, I turned and walked away, heading straight for the door. I didn't care who saw me or what anyone thought. All that mattered was one thing. I was done being the guy who let this happen. Now, I was going to make sure it ended. For good. The drive back to my house was a blur. The rain had picked up, turning the streets into a maze of wet reflections, the headlights from passing cars painting everything in long streaks of light. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of everything I'd just learned, everything I was about to face. Javier was out of the picture for now, but I knew I still had to deal with the bigger problem. The person who had broken me the most. Sophia. I could still hear her voice, the way she used to laugh when I said something stupid, the way she'd light up when we talked about the future. We used to dream together, about kids, about a house, about traveling, about growing old. All of it. All of that had been a lie. A lie. She wasn't the woman I thought I married. She was something else, something I could never have prepared for. The car skidded slightly as I turned into the driveway, tires sloshing through the puddles. The house looked the same as it always had, as if nothing had changed, as if everything was still normal. But I wasn't fooled. The cracks were already there. They had been there for months, and now they were wide open, letting everything spill out. I killed the engine and sat there for a second, my hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles went white. I was shaking, but not from fear. No, I was shaking because I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't recognize the man I'd become, the one who was capable of this kind of cold fury. But this was the only way I could handle it now. I wasn't looking for closure. I wasn't looking for apologies. What I wanted, what I needed, was the truth. The whole damn truth. I stepped out of the car, the rain soaking through my jacket almost immediately. My feet were heavy as I walked up the porch, the sound of my boots splashing in the puddles a stark contrast to the silence hanging over everything. I could feel her presence inside the house. I could feel the weight of her absence, even though she was still there. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. Sophia never thought anyone would dare to question her. She was so sure that her secrets were safe, that her lies were airtight. She had no idea how wrong she was. I pushed open the door, the familiar creak of it sending a jolt through me. Everything inside the house was still the same. The pictures on the walls, the smell of her perfume lingering in the air, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It all felt like a memory I wasn't part of anymore. I could feel the distance, the chasm between the man I used to be and the man I was now. A man who was about to tear everything apart. I called her name as I stepped inside, my voice rough, hoarse from the adrenaline. Sophia. I heard her footsteps before I saw her. She appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing that same smug look on her face that I had come to loathe. She didn't look scared, not at all. In fact, she looked like she was expecting this, expecting me to finally figure it out. Her eyes met mine, and I saw the flicker of something there, something that almost looked like guilt, but she quickly masked it as always. "Ethan," she said, her voice light, almost too light. "You're home early. How was your day?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. How was my day? How was my day?
I thought about what I had learned in the past few hours, about the pain I was still trying to shake from my body, about what she'd done to me, and she was asking about my day?
You've got a lot of nerve, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. I didn't want to yell at her. I didn't want to be that guy, the guy who couldn't control himself. But right now, I couldn't help it. I was done pretending that everything was fine, that this wasn't the breaking point. She tilted her head slightly, her expression more amused than anything else. What's wrong, Ethan? Why are you so upset? Don't play dumb with me, I snapped. I know everything. About you. About Javier. About everything. Her eyes widened just a fraction, the only sign that I'd actually caught her off guard. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Then she let out a nervous laugh, trying to cover it up with a forced smile. You've been talking to Darius, haven't you? She asked, though I could tell she already knew the answer. I nodded, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Yeah. I know all about it. I know you've been sleeping with him behind my back. I know how you left me to die, Sophia. I know everything. And now you're gonna explain yourself. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something, real, raw emotion, in her eyes. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even regret. It was panic. She knew she had been caught, and there was no running from it anymore. But even in her panic, she didn't seem to fully understand the depth of what she'd done. She opened her mouth again, but this time, her words were barely a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Ethan. It just happened. Just happened. Those words. I'd heard them from her before, countless times. Always a defense. Always some kind of excuse to hide the truth. You think I'm gonna buy that? I said, voice dripping with disbelief. You think I'm going to sit here and let you explain away everything you've done? You left me for dead, Sophia. You and him. You both thought I was nothing. You thought I'd just disappear, and you'd carry on like nothing ever happened. I didn't want this, she said, her voice trembling now. I didn't want to hurt you. I was just, I don't know. I was lonely. You weren't there for me, Ethan. Not the way I needed you to be. Lonely. That was her excuse? My chest tightened as I fought to keep my emotions in check. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all. I wanted her to feel what I felt. You didn't want this? I repeated, my voice colder now, empty of all warmth. Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me instead of sneaking around behind my back? I thought it was over between us, she whispered, barely audible. I thought you didn't care anymore. I thought you wouldn't even notice. It hit me like a slap. She thought I wouldn't notice. She thought I wouldn't care. That's what it all came down to. She didn't believe in me anymore. She didn't believe in us. You couldn't have been more wrong, I said quietly. The words stung. But you know what, Sophia? You're right about one thing. It is over. She took a step forward, her hand outstretched, but I took a step back, putting distance between us. I didn't want to touch her. I didn't want her near me. I'm done, I said. The words felt like they were coming from someone else, someone I barely recognized. But they were true. You've broken me. You've broken everything. And as I turned to leave, I felt the weight of it all. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak, pressing down on me. I was done with her. I was done with this life. Now, there was only one thing left to do. Find the closure I needed. And make her understand. I didn't know where I was going at first. I just knew I had to get out of there. I couldn't stay in that house a minute longer, not with her still standing there, pretending to feel anything for me. I didn't care anymore about explanations or apologies. Those were just empty words. The damage had been done, and it was too deep to fix with a few quiet apologies. I walked out into the rain, my boots sloshing through the wet ground as I made my way to the car. Everything felt numb, like I was floating in a fog. I didn't want to feel anything right then. Not anger, not sadness, just nothing. But as I sat behind the wheel, I realized something. I wasn't doing this for her. I wasn't even doing it for revenge anymore. I was doing it for me, for the guy I used to be, The guy who had trusted, who had loved, who had given everything to someone he thought he could count on. I had to take back what was mine, even if it meant breaking everything I'd built. The road ahead was a blur as I drove through the city, the wipers brushing away the heavy rain. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe a final confrontation with Sophia, maybe just a way to feel in control again. The world outside seemed like it belonged to someone else now. I wasn't part of that world anymore. I pulled up to Darius' place, his lights still on in the upstairs apartment. He lived in a small, run-down building on the outskirts of the city. Nothing flashy. I rang the bell twice, my pulse still racing from everything that had just happened. I didn't need to say much. Darius knew me too well to ask the usual questions. When he opened the door, his tired eyes told me everything I needed to know. He'd seen the pain in my face already. He didn't need to hear the full story. "Everything go down all right?" he asked quietly, his voice low. "Yeah," I said, rubbing my face with both hands. "It's over." I told her everything. She had no idea what she was dealing with. Darius stepped aside, letting me into the small apartment. The familiar smell of coffee and old leather filled the air, but it was too quiet. Darius made his way over to the couch and sat down, motioning for me to join him. He knew I needed to talk, even if I didn't have the words yet. "I feel like I've been through hell," I said, sinking into the couch beside him. "And I think I might have come out the other side a completely different guy. But I'm not sure who that guy is." Darius nodded slowly, as if he understood. He'd seen me at my lowest, and now he was watching me pick up the pieces. "You'll figure it out, Ethan. It's gonna be a long road, but you've made it through worse." "I don't know if I'm ready for that road," I confessed, staring at my hands. They were trembling, but not from fear. It was from the weight of everything I'd just done, everything I was about to leave behind. I didn't just lose my wife. I lost myself. Darius. I don't know who I am without her. Without this life we had together. It feels like, I don't know, like I'm trying to walk in shoes that don't fit anymore. "You'll find your way back," he said quietly. "You're strong. You always were." I didn't know if I believed him. How could I? All I had ever wanted was to build something real, something lasting. But it was all a lie. My marriage was a lie. And Sophia? She was a lie too. But that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just ruin you. It changes you. It strips you of who you were and leaves you with a raw, broken version of yourself, the one you don't recognize, but the one who can finally see things clearly. I wasn't that naive guy anymore. I wasn't the guy who would keep giving and forgiving. I looked at Darius, his eyes steady on me. He'd been through his own battles. He knew what it took to survive. And in some ways, he was the only one who could see what I was going through, because he was the one who had helped me get this far. "I don't know what comes next," I said, standing up and walking to the window. The rain had slowed, and for a moment, it felt like the world was holding its breath. But I'm not going back to her. Not to that life. I don't care if it's messy or if it's hard, I'm not going back. Darius stood up, his hands in his pockets. "Then don't. You've already paid the price for everything you've lost. Don't let her take any more from you." I nodded, turning to face him. "Yeah, you're right." And with that, I walked out of his apartment, the night air cold against my skin, but I felt like I was finally breathing again. I didn't know where I was headed. I didn't know what the future held. But I knew one thing for sure. I was done being the victim. I was done being the guy who let everything fall apart. As I drove home, I realized that the real revenge wasn't in what I could do to her or to Javier. It wasn't about making them suffer the way they'd made me suffer. No, the real revenge was in walking away. In reclaiming myself, piece by broken piece. And as for Sophia, she'd never understand the man I had become, the one who had been broken, but who had learned to rise from the ashes, fueled by a fury she could never match. I wasn't going to waste another minute on someone who had betrayed me so completely. This was my life now, and it was time to take control. The price of betrayal wasn't just blood. It was everything I'd ever believed in, everything I thought was real. But the man I was now, he was never going to be fooled again. I drove into the night, not looking back. Thank you for watching this video to the end. What did you like most about this story? Write your answers in the comments. See you in the next video.